Welcome everyone to this short video presentation on Granados' Introduction to Sacramental Theology, Chapter 13, entitled The Sacraments and Christian Action. Again, my first question, as always, is why, Granados, do you have to say so many good things? Because we have so much little time to discuss them. I'll do my best in just narrating us through this chapter and some highlights I found throughout. Page 295, the start of the chapter, he says, we understand that the everyday life of family and friends, work and free time is entirely sacramental life. I just love where he begins. That general idea I think is so true. And even as one Jewish philosopher, my favorite philosopher of all time, I would have to say, I wrote a book on his work, a philosopher named Emmanuel Levinas, talks about, in his words, the liturgy of dailiness, or what you could call an ethical liturgy. Liturgy, by her very nature, is not only contemplative, prayerful, adoring, worshiping God, but it also attends to the needs of the neighbor, the second great commandment as Jesus instructs us. So there are ethical implications to liturgy. And that is where this chapter is unfolding, in those ethical offshoots of the liturgical experience. So page 297, a great quote toward the bottom, given that the Eucharist refers to the corporeal life, so bodily life, lived in the flesh, and surrender of Christ, to participate in the Eucharist is to make of one's own life and surrender in the body a Eucharistic act, just like Christ, a Eucharistic offering. Do I say this to my wife? Take this and eat it. This is my body given up for you. Take and drink. This is my blood offered up for you. This is me. That's what the wedding vows are saying. That's what the wedding vows are saying. The oath between a man and woman, become husband and wife. First of all, the very foundation of society, of the family as the living and fundamental cell of society, it begins there. And what could a diocesan priest, is he saying these words of Christ in relation to the church? I sacrifice my body for the sake of shepherding this people, and so on. Parents and children, and good friends, different kinds of relationships, different degrees of self-giving, but nevertheless, the same Eucharistic pattern that's meant to run through it all. What I might do is just focus on my double star quotes, just for the sake of time. Page 298, moving into this section, Sacrament and Christian Moral Action. A great quote from St. Hilary of Poitiers, the 4th century bishop, page 299. The Eucharist makes us one not only through a unity of wills, but through a radical participation in the flesh of Christ, which generates within us a new way of willing. We thought he might say a new way of living, which we probably heard before. But to be generated within us a new way of willing is huge, which means a new way of loving, a new way of desiring. The Eucharist, participation in this flesh of Christ, generates this within us. So we think of that relationship between receiving the sacraments and how we live, but how we live depends on how we will, and this is why there's reference to the will of God in the Our Father prayer, the great prayer of our faith that Jesus gave us. Fiat voluntas tua sicut in cielo et in terra. Thy will be done, let thy will be done, voluntas tua, the voluntas of God. We want to become our own voluntas, the Latin word. So it's nice to use other language, just to bring the point home more, voluntas, the will. What one intends, what one desires, what one wants to see through to completion. We act because we will. So many great points. I just hate passing all these up. We have on page 300 a section, participation in the action of Christ with both hands and heart. And then page 303, the section, the Lutheran crisis and the response of Trent. The works of God from a Catholic perspective, ex opere operato, gratuitously save us by going ahead of the action of the creature. The sacrament sanctifies ex opere operato a Christo, thanks to the work performed by Jesus in his passion. But the Church has always understood that in order to obtain the grace of the sacrament, openness to faith is necessary, together with the rejection of sin. It's a coordination of desire to receive this grace and not put any obstacles in the way. Page 305, this is to say, while man is called not to impede the action of grace, not to place an obstacle, the distinctive feature of this grace is that it takes up human action into itself, branching out into the whole believer's life. So grace bears fruit. We read with St. Paul in Galatians 5 about the fruits of the Spirit. Somebody who has received the grace of Christ, who claims to be a follower of him, and in their life, what do you find? Fruits of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, modesty, self-mastery, all of these things. Grace is meant to bear fruit in our lives. And this is a real difference between Catholic understanding of how salvation works and Protestant understanding. We don't believe in the doctrine of total depravity in Catholicism. It's a Protestant notion. But we believe in the perfectibility of the human nature in this life. It's not what's called forensic justification from without with Luther and company, but it is a participatory justification from within, from the inside out, because God is operative in the human nature and wants to perfect the human nature so that the person's life looks like the Beatitudes Jesus is describing, and that these are made possible by the gifts of God the Holy Spirit. Wisdom, knowledge, understanding, counsel, fortitude, piety, fear of the Lord. That these gifts unfold the virtuous life in the person, all the cardinal virtues, the theological virtues, and all the related ones. So this is so amazing that our lives can bear these fruits by the grace of God. We can be changed. So again, how we understand salvation by participation. We have something to do. So St. James says faith without works is dead. Luther wanted to excise that letter from the New Testament. It's talking about works too much. We want sola fide, faith alone. Luther wanted to advocate, but Catholicism says no. Our salvation is something that in which development is involved according to the law of gradualism. Salvation wants to bear its fruits over the course of time. That's why those of us who have lived as long as we have need to be so thankful to God and to feel the great responsibility of our age. Jesus died when he was 33. Like, I'm 10 years past that. There better be fruits bearing in my life as a follower of Christ. And so if we have the privilege of getting older in years, there should be more abundant fruit there. And it's not to say a young person can't bear abundant fruit, like There's many child saints or young adult saints. So this is also possible, this precocious movement of the Spirit. But for those of us who have been granted so many years, like, what are we doing with that time? What are we doing with that time today? What spiritual battle are we fighting? What spiritual battle do we know is like nearby? And we're resisting, we're renouncing. So I'm ready to get done with this video and get back to it. But even doing this video itself is part of that for me. So page 308, from the rite, the liturgical rite to the body, the literal action. This is so beautiful that the liturgical action expresses the meaning of the living action and gives it its power. So page 309, I just love this section, this stuff about what I call, from referencing the Swiss Catholic theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar, this theodrama. How the theodrama unfolds in our lives. First of all, how it's enacted in liturgy, then how it unfolds in our daily living. So there's this paradox that by following the literal narrowness of the action, we enter into a realm higher than that of our isolated desire. And our will can expand according to the yearning for the infinite that runs through it. Wow. So, the paradox, we follow the literal narrowness of the action of the protagonist, Jesus Christ, in his Gospels and the liturgical movement. Our will expands according to the infinite that runs through it, so that the universal is manifest in and through the particular, that the whole is manifest and proclaimed in and through the part. That's something Balthasar says too. The fragment, in the fragment is revealed the whole. And that's what we discover in liturgy, in the life of Christ. The Spirit of Jesus desired to pour itself out entirely. This is the baffling Christian truth in the concrete humility of the flesh, because it is in the flesh that are rooted these relationships that the Spirit of love, wants to enliven. The sacramental path leads then, so to speak, from the outside in, passing through the flesh, which is also the letter, the formula of the rite, so as to give form to our interiority. So we participate in salvation, I said earlier, from the inside out, only as much as God enters from the outside in. The holy otherness of God enters into our most interior part of our being in order to extend that incarnation in our own flesh. Page 312, accompanying the sacramental gift. Such great points here, getting into the other 7 sacraments beyond the Eucharist. It's just so rich. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to quote one last thing here on page 316. Thinking about penance, matrimony and penance. These sacraments embrace the person's whole narrative, going beyond the moment of the celebration. So true. In matrimony, this occurs because of the marriage vows, the promise that embraces the entire life of the spouses. For someone can promise only if he can remember, and thus will not forget the promise, and is able to anticipate his future, come what may, thus saying, I will be with you always. And penance too expands in time, for time is necessary in order to admit guilt, to set out on the road to forgiveness, thus recovering the narrative unity of life that had been broken by sin. And time is also required for the penance, for those acts of indulgence, the temporal, dealing with the temporal punishment due to sin. Time is a healer, therefore, and the liturgical tempo invests historical time with a transcendent character that lifts us into eternity.